We're very proud to present Timothy Leary.
Well, I want to thank Jean-Pierre for inviting me. This is a wonderful spot, Cafe Largo, so a little applause for our host. He gave me some of the best advice I've ever been given as a public speaker. He said, don't forget the mic. So I won't forget the mic. But if I do, you remind me, all right? Okay. This is a very special neighborhood for me because in 1976 I finished 6 years in the penalty box where I had been put by Richard Nixon. And when I got my parole, I headed for this territory and spent the last, whatever it is, 15 years in a rectangle, which I think is the hottest landing spot and launching pad on the planet Earth right now. I think of civilization now as being bounded on the east by La Brea, and the north by Ventura Boulevard, and the south, I don't know, what, Robertson, I don't know, go ahead.
Western.
Yeah, right, that's right. But I spent the happiest and most stimulating years of my life in this little rectangle along the Sunset Strip, and I'm very happy to be here. I consider this my neighborhood, my hometown, my village, and I thank you for joining me here on, is it Tuesday night? Yeah. Now, the title of our lecture tonight is something about the 5 cultural revolutions which have changed the world forever since 1950 or so forth. And I'm going to try to cover that territory. I may ramble now and then because, well, for one thing, so many things happen that happen in my mind that I've been experiencing recently that I want to share with you. I'm also, I tend to kind of ramble a little bit these days because I'm going through a sequence of consciousness alteration and consciousness expansion, which is quite new to me, and which I intend to study very disciplined way and try to share it with other people. It's called senility.
No.
I'm 71 years old, and now listen, people have given senility a bad rap. It's an old cliche by wise old people that youth is wasted on the young. That may or may not be true. I don't think since the 60s that's true anymore. Thank you. But I do know that senility in senior citizenship is wasted on the old. As a person who likes to be a pioneer of human evolution, I'm enjoying this frontier territory of getting older. As I've said many times, you probably heard me say it. As you get older, senility is like sensimilla. There tends to be an over-jamming of stimulations. You just simply see too much at a time. You tend to maybe forget what you were talking about 2 minutes ago. But I'm not going to do it tonight. I'm not going to do it tonight because I know that I'm going to talk about the 5 cultural revolutions which have ended the industrial civilization, mechanical civilization, and are preparing us for the wonderful 21st century. And before I get into this historical wrap, I'd like to remind myself and remind you that everything I'm going to say tonight most of what I've been saying in the last 40 years that I've been in semi-public disgrace, has one aim, that is to encourage and empower the individual to think for yourself and question authority. And this is an easy thing to and try out new things. Then in the 1960s, I got involved in a revolution which has to do with freeing the brain, or liberating the brain, or to put it more bluntly, taking the power to change the mind and the brain with vegetables and chemicals, taking that power away from the medical profession and saying that any adult American has the right to change your body and your mind any way you fucking want to, in privacy of your own home. Now, again, just as if you encourage people to become what they want to, they'll become some funny things. It is true that the power of medication, self-medication, of brain change is an awesome, awesome situation, because we're now learning what the brain is. There's been a tremendous taboo about what the human brain actually is and what it can do. For thousands of years, the notion that we had brains that had this power of processing information and creating multimedia images for the owner thereof is something that simply didn't exist. When I was in graduate school at Berkeley, they hardly ever mentioned the brain. And when they did, they said, well, the brain is a wonderful thing. It's like the equivalent of the Chicago or the New York City telephone exchange. No, shit. I got all those wires coming in, and I don't know my area code. And, the point here, of course, is that in our evolution as human beings, which is basically the evolution of learning how to run, operate, control, and direct and navigate our brains, we can only understand the brain in terms of the models or the technology, the instruments we had. In the 1950s, the closest thing to a brain was a telephone system with all the wires coming in and the connections and so forth, and then the messages going out. I got a phone call from, by the way, I'll give you another bottom line summary of what I'm going to try to ramble about tonight. There is ongoing in the world today an extraordinary revolution in people's minds. I've done a lot of traveling in the last 3 or 4 years. I just came back from Japan, where I spent 2 weeks with my son Zach, where we met literally dozens and dozens of really young Japanese people. I've talked to young people from South Korea. I've been to Europe. My friend, partner, Professor Mel Seals. Mel, wave a hand there, from Penn State. We're doing a lot of wild things with cybernetic psychedelic teaching at Penn State. And we were together in Europe. When you go through Europe, you meet it everywhere. There's this new breed which has been emerging of people that, you can tell by looking at them that they are not going to work on Maggie's farm no more. They're not going to work on Brezhnev's farm no more. They're not going to work on Mitsubishi's farm no more. It's surprising that even in Japan, which is considered like the monolithic, robotized, successfully engineered society in the world, hey, there are things going on in Japan which are really very, very encouraging, in the sense that it's this revolution that we've been going through in the last 30, 40 years, which did start in America. And that's the point I'm trying to make here, is that there's a wonderful global situation happening. And this moment, I think it's the moment to stop and just remind ourselves of what went on in the Soviet Union just in the last 2 weeks. Zach and I were in Japan when the so-called coup took place, and one of the things you learn, whenever you get out of the United States, you realize how narrow and parochial and really simple-minded the American press and American media is. I mean, in Tokyo, in a hotel room in Tokyo, you get the International Herald Tribune, you get the Tokyo Post, you get the Tokyo Times, and you're simply getting a series of viewpoints, different perspectives from different countries. And I know, like the rest of you, I was deeply moved by observing what went on in the Soviet Union. We saw it happen. We saw it happen in 1989 when the Berlin Wall went down. We saw it happen when those incredible Woodstock meetings happened in Prague and in Budapest and even in Tiananmen Square in China. We saw that same feeling, that same spirit that we recognized in America in the late 60s and 70s in this country, that sense of a whole new generation of people, regardless of their age, discovering that you're free, that you don't have to spend your whole life living up to someone's expectations. I know that, like you, I saw those people coming over the Berlin Wall, and those people that came over the Berlin Wall, they were not diplomats with briefcases. They were not Schwarzkopfs and hotshot Marines coming over that wall. They were young people, students, intellectuals who were taking advantage of what they'd seen happen in this country to make that great step. I collected a lot of newspapers in Tokyo, and I spent the afternoon with Professor Mel Seeholz. We were clipping out some of the statements that were made about those great events in the Soviet Union. I'm sure you know the story that there were 3 people that were shot in the Kremlin Square in Moscow. They were 3 hippies. I'm not saying that. That was said in the newspaper. One of them was named Ilya Khrushchevsky. His mother said, well, he always thought for himself. I mean, he was always a hippie. He was writing all that funny poetry. I mean, he could just never get along with the system. He was always fucking thinking for himself. And, the story with him is that he had actually served, as I think all 3 of these young martyrs had served, in the Soviet army when they drafted them and sent them down to Afghanistan. And the parallels between Vietnam and Afghanistan, I'm sure, have been clear to you as they were clear to Gorbachev. And when this guy, Ilya Khrushchevsky, jumped on the tank, he wanted to climb in the tank, he didn't have a gun, he didn't have a bomb in his hand. He was trying to say, hey, brothers, don't fucking shoot us because we're with it. We got a long collection of clips. You know that, I don't know if it was reported here, but Gorbachev, during the funeral honoring of these 3 young student hippies, heroes of the Soviet Union, the highest award that they can give them, Gorbachev looked at the parents and says, I have tears in my eyes when I look at your parents and what your children did for the Soviet Union, what we couldn't do. Gorbachev even mentioned that we learned something about the power of the individual. Now, when I sit and I watch and I read a newspaper saying that the head of the Communist Party is suddenly discovering the power of the individual, I mean, really, it's something that Bob Dylan should be proud of. But anyway, I'm kind of rambling again. We'll get back to that. The second revolution I'm talking about is, of course, the power to self-medicate. Now, that's interesting because you probably don't remember this, but in the 1950s, when there was a big deal about psychology and learning to, figure out who you were and actually define yourself as an individual as different from somebody else and planning your own career and so forth, they discovered something wonderful that actually came from World War II. It was called drugs, mind drugs. And the first mind drugs, as you probably, when I said you remember, were called tranquilizers. Because it's a wonderful thing. You know, if people were worried or questioning too much, or they weren't adjusting, or they weren't marching along the way they should, you could give them tranquilizers, those Milktown and the Valium and so forth, so that actually in 1960, when I first started my work at Harvard, the whole notion of using drugs to change the mind was something, again, that seemed to me that was offensive, and another tool of the mind controllers to kind of keep people quiet. And it was a great shock to me that when my friends, my gurus, my teachers like Aldous Huxley and Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac and of course William Burroughs, these people came to Harvard and taught us square professors something about how the tradition of brain change and re-imprinting of the brain has been going on for thousands of years. Okay, that's the second revolution. The third one, of course, happened in the 70s with the political revolution. And what happened in this country and later in Europe was a strange, amazing kind of political revolution. It's the first time in human history, number one, that young people started a revolution. And it was the first time there was a revolution in which there were no partisan sides. Usually, typically, there were the oppressors, and you were oppressed, and as soon as you got rid of the oppressors, then you became an oppressor yourself. It was monopoly capitalism versus monopoly socialism, or, you know, throughout history has always been the under group wanting to get control. This was the first revolution in human history, that revolution in the 70s and 80s, the 70s, that didn't involve replacing one party with another. Simply I remember Bill Walton, you know Bill Walton, the basketball player? Great hippie from the 70s, you know, the 7-foot-tall, red-headed guy with growing a beard, announcing he was a vegetarian, and is winning UCLA national awards, announcing he was smoking marijuana. I mean, he's one of the great heroes. And I was watching the Tiananmen Square thing with Bill, and he said, you know what's going on over there? That what these kids are revolting about is not trying to replace Mao with Marx or Marx with you know, capitalism. They fucking want to choose their college majors. They want to choose who they would go out with and date. They want to choose how they would dress. In other words, they want to. So that's the political revolution, which has boggled the minds of most of the diplomats and the politicians. The fourth revolution, I'll tell you very quickly, is the cybernetic revolution, the psychedelic cybernetic revolution. Next week, if we assemble here again, I'm going to talk about and demonstrate the new generation of handheld, multimedia, electronic brain-fucking devices that will allow you to imprint your own brain and also, more important, to communicate from the right part of your brain to other people's. But surely you're aware of the fact that there's a new counterculture called cyberpunk, or people using computers not to empower the organization or not to improve their mathematical or file keeping skills, but in order to communicate and to manage their mind better. Now, that's roughly the fourth revolution. I might not even get to the fifth. But going into some of the details, I'm impelled at this moment to show you my T-shirt as an illustration of the kind of celebration and of the spirit that I've been detecting in the world in the last few months. Well, it was 2 nights ago, my friend Mel C. Schultz and I, and a man named Robert Anton Wilson. How many of you know his name? Yeah, how about Robert Anton Wilson? Yeah. We had been in Chicago for 3 days, which talk about a new spirit in this country. We were there because there was a national convention of the Libertarian Party. I don't know if you know what they're all about. That's a group of people that don't like the Republicans and Democrats, and their one position that without violence, get the fucking government off our back. And I was very proud and pleased to be a part of that convention. There was also a science fiction convention. It's called the WorldCom. There were 6,000 people in the, what was the hotel they were in, Mel?
Hyatt.
Hyatt Hotel, yeah, it's an enormous hotel. And we're talking about 6,000 individuals. There was a note there that they were dressed as witches and as warlocks and as science fiction beaming up stuff you can't name. And everyone was just dressing the way they fucking wanted to. And they would get 6,000 of them roaming around in the hotel. It was rather mind-boggling. We also participated in 2 big rallies and conventions of the free marijuana movement that's going on there. So we had a very libertarian, exciting 3 days in Chicago. We got in a plane, rather fatigued. ready to have a nice quiet trip back to L.A. And through some connections I have with the airlines, we got bulkhead seats, which allow a lot of room in front. We were just settling down to a nice quiet trip from Chicago to New York, and suddenly in front of me there were three guys that were definitely wild men. They were not young Republicans. You could tell by their look, by their attitude. It turned out they were roadies and kind of assistant of a group called Guns N' Roses. Now, it's interesting because the last time I was on this podium was about a month ago. I was here with Danny Sugarman. Were any of you there? Remember Danny Sugarman? Danny, as you know, grew up with Jim Morrison and the Doors. He's written two wonderful books about his Wonderland Avenue days with Jim Morrison and the Doors. And he's just written a book recently about Guns N' Roses, and because of the book, I read the book, and, you know, and I've got, I try to keep in touch with some younger people, so I knew roughly who Guns N' Roses were, but suddenly, in front of us, lying down on the floor of the plane, and one of them taking off his T-shirt with the crew of Guns N' Roses, assuming, as a matter of fact, insisting that we have a party. Now, you know, I've been in a lot of trouble in my life. And, I try to choose the trouble I get into. It was kind of in my mind to start a wild party, you know, 5 miles aloft in an airplane. And this guy took off his T-shirt and he gave it to me. This says something very obscene and very anarchic. I don't know what exactly it said, but it says something about, it said guns and riot, and it's definitely an inciting of individual emotion. And as soon as he took off his shirt, there's a guy just lying on the floor of an airplane with his shirt off and some whiskey glass in his hand, so we got him covered up. The head stewardess and the head steward, they were middle-aged. People came up and said, listen, if this gets too rowdy, oh, by the way, they brought us a bunch of bottles of dangerous mind-operating, mind-bending stuff. And I said, listen, if this gets out of hand, just tell me. Just right. And the stewardess said, no problem, as long as you don't wake up the baby in the seat behind us. Well, I turned back to the seat behind us, and it turned out that the seat behind us, there was an editor of, you know, how many of you know Jeremy Tarcher's publication? You know, he does the psychedelic books. Anyway, he's a L.A. guy. So that the editor and his wife and his 2 babies are there, so pretty soon the babies were in my lap and the picture was being taken. And we had a thing going. And see, I'm kind of embarrassed to be a 71-year-old man telling you that we were acting like crazy adolescents on a plane. We had 2 Guns N' Roses guys halfway down the thing, and 2 either side of the back bulkhead, and we were smoking cigarettes on the back of a plane. Really, anyway, I'm not urging, I'm not advocating you. I'm not advocating you to take off your shirts and things, but to me that was a sense of, there are a lot of people in this country. I would say there's a silent majority, a good 80 or 100 million people who are fucking fed up of the Puritan ethic, the morality, the mind your own business, the mentality that the Reagan-Bush Puritans have been pushing on this country, and I was rather encouraged to see that this spirit does exist, and believe me, it's global.
Yay!
While I'm encouraging you with these thoughts of global, I didn't tell you about the call I got from Brazil. I got a call from Brazil from a reporter about 3 weeks ago. He said he's a reporter for one of the largest newspapers in Brazil, and he said, I didn't know who he was. He said, listen, I wanted to get a reaction to you because, you know, there's been a big outbreak of LSD taking in Sao Paulo, Brazil. I said, no shit. And yeah. He said, it's got the police very puzzled. And I said, yeah, why? He said, Well, because they're not rock and rollers, they're professors and intellectuals and ministers and priests. Like, they're upper middle class people that are doing it for spiritual reasons. What do you think of that? And I said, yeah. I know, I've been through that. In the 1950s, Cary Grant was running around Benedict Canyon urging everyone to take LSD. Aldous Huxley was running, and there were about 20 psychiatrists in Beverly Hills, including Oz Janiger, who were legally training people how to use LSD. Chris Richwood, what else? Oh, Arthur Chester, you know.
Thelma Moss?
Yeah, oh God, Thelma Moss, right? Yeah, you go on listening to names. And I said, you know, and Henry Luce, the founder of Time, I was saying this to the reporter, you know, the cream of American intellectuals and professors that were doing that, the head Jesuit and then Father Murray, everyone was taking LSD and finding God. I said, but I want to warn the people of Brazil what could happen. I said this wonderful intellectual, psychedelic, spiritual, visionary group of upper middle class people in the United States who were taking these drugs for spiritual purposes. The whole thing kind of blew out of the water when a bunch of people called rock and rollers came along. And Dylan was going around, and Jimi Hendrix, the Experience, and the people were singing, you gotta get stoned and all that stuff. So I said, my advice to the people of Brazil is take the LSD you want, but ban rock and roll. Oh yeah, that's Brazil. In Japan, I've mentioned already, but you would be amazed. There is a new spirit of youth and of cultural change. And you know, it all stems from the late 60s in America. They watched, I believe it all on Bob Dylan, you know. Don't follow leaders, watch your parking meters. They caught that, I can remember clearly when I first caught it. I'd been in the East Coast at Harvard, and then we were at Millbrook, we were doing all these, we were publishing magazines, we were publishing books, and you know, right and left and all that. And then Gordon Lee ran us out of town. And we had to leave, and I came back to Berkeley, California, where I had a house. I remember the first day I got to Berkeley, California, it was about 1964, 65, and you walk around Berkeley, and the river was going like this. Hey, brother, hey, sister. You know, it was a sense, a spirit, a collectivity, a kind of a momentum of enough people that felt that same way that you could walk around, and you could walk around San Francisco and Berkeley, and you didn't get that so much in Cambridge University and all that, or Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I saw it for the first time in Berkeley, California. But then I saw it again when Franco, the dictator of Spain, died, whenever that happened. Then we saw it again with the Berlin Wall. We saw it again just 3 weeks ago. That V sign of, and it's happening in Japan. I don't know how much detail to go into, but I'm kind of connected to working with a company in Japan. And I'm going to tell you this little story because it kind of shows you that the revolution we're talking about, when it really works, it's almost invisible. It has nothing to do with, certainly with guns. It has nothing to do with the protests anymore. Coming together that way, that was great. But in Japan, there's a company called Recruit. And what this company does, it provides young Japanese college students information about all the different companies that they can go to work for. Now that sounds, you know, just how banal, how unexciting is a company that will tell you, you know, what Ford's like and what like that. But in Japan, this is the most revolutionary thing. It makes Karl Marx look like Groucho Marx. See, the notion that Japanese college kids could choose their company. Not only that, Recruit specializes. If you want to change your job, if you work for Mitsubishi and you want to, you know, learn something else, the notion that number one, you can select your company, and number two, that you can change. Another statistic, which you're never going to see it in the political pages. You have to kind of look for it, but there's a big problem developing in Japan because the percentage of college students in Japan that want to be engineers is dropping. It used to be 60%. It used to be the smartest young college kids will become engineers. Now, they're anticipating that in about 10 years, there will not be enough engineers to keep that big engineered system going. And as I say, these are not necessarily headline news, but this company, which is now very interested in developing techniques and methods and computer programs that will help Japanese young people, number one, learn about themselves and learn about the companies. And I would have talked to some Japanese companies, this one company Recruit, the top officials there, and they said, what kind of software programs are you developing? And I said, well, I've got a program that will teach you how to become creative. What? I got one that'll teach you how to think individually. Oh, what? Yeah, I got one that'll teach you how to be irreverent. What? Got one that'll teach you how to be sophisticated in any kind of situation, yeah? I mean, they simply looked at me with incredible delight and pleasure, and I'm getting letters from this company saying, we love you. And it's not my charm that they're in love with. It's just an idea that I'm simply the first person that they heard say this. And again, I'm saying these things to tell you that there are tremendously wonderful things happening throughout the world. And of course, they're never, you're never going to see it on the 6:30 news, or you're not going to see it in the headlines of the papers. At the same time, I want to tell you, I've been around this planet for 71 years, and I have never been more spooked or frightened at mind control and brain manipulation that I have seen taking place in America in the last 11 years since I know a great deal about imprinting and changing minds and overloading nervous systems with multimedia, multisensory avalanches of data, and then shoving messages and imprinting. When we were at Harvard in the early 60s, we wrote many, many books and spent many years learning how to, basically help someone, your brain with 100 billion neurons, your brain which has more power to compute than there are atoms in the universe. It's an enormous instrument, and we don't know how to program it. We were learning how to do this through psychedelic and yogic and visionary techniques. Because even then we didn't know enough about the brain, because we didn't know about computers. Now I guess it's the time for me to digress about the brain and do the brain sales job. The human brain has 100 billion neurons, and the connections, and by the way, these neurons are not little plugs of telephone wires, nor are they even little neurons that click off and on, and this talk about the synapse where one clicks and the other acts on that, forget that. The adventures that happen between one neuron and another, it's called a synaptic gap. There's probably more information being exchanged there in layers and layers, which would be almost miles thick in terms of human perception. The amount of information that is exchanged at the level of two neurons interacting is we simply don't have the equipment and the technology to appreciate the power of this. And the terrible thing about it, the depressing thing about it, the tragic thing about it is that we're all born with this equipment. Take the poorest starving kid in Calcutta or Africa. You've seen these kids on, their big eyes and their bellies extended and they're scrawny little, and you realize that their chances of ever surviving are almost nil. And now we know that child has a brain equal to Einstein's, and the only difference between that child starving in the Congo or in Calcutta and the brilliance of that wonderful mind Einstein's is simply the programming, the software, the learning how to operate that brain. Now that is a very powerful political statement and a very powerful religious statement. There's a taboo about this, because if we really understood the power of the human brain and the preciousness of the brain in the poorest kid starving in the poorest third world country or the inner city, we realize the enormity of the tragedy that's going on. Another thing that's interesting is that apparently 25,000 years ago, we were living in caves, running around with those wonderful fur coats that we used to enjoy. We were living in a cave. We had the same brain. And you can even define the evolution of human society or human civilization in terms of step-by-step building techniques and methods and devices that allow us to reflect back and learn how to understand our bodies and our brains. So this notion of the power of the brain, and then the technical situation here of how do you program it, how do you imprint it, how can we learn to use it? And I think I've studied this question with my partners as well as anyone has, because we were lucky enough to be born in the latter part of the 20th century. We're learning a little bit about how you program a brain. And the way you program a brain is that you have to think of your brain as a enormous set of computers. If you know enough about how to operate a computer, you know that you format your computer. Your computer's got this enormous amount of knowledge processing potentiality, but you have to program it. You put in a word processing program called WordStar or Mac Word. You put in a filing system, and then this enormous, powerful computer is run through the word processing system. And sometimes, you get stuck in that and you can't get out of it. If you're going to use the rest of your computer, you have to get out of that and know how to format new directories and format new files, and particularly learn how to communicate your computers with it. We're just now learning how to program the human brain. And then looking back from what we know now, we can see how the human brain has been programmed by mind controllers and brain controllers throughout human history. By the way, is this okay what I'm talking about? You want to take a 5-minute break?
Everybody's like a trance.
Okay, yeah. I asked you this question. It's the year, say, 1200 AD. How is it possible that the people that run the Catholic Church had like 50 million people running from Constantinople in the east all the way up to Rome and even into Ireland, I don't know, 50 or 60 or 70, 80 million people at a time when there was no printing press, there was no television, there was no telephone. The only way you could get from one country to another was on horse or by walking. The number of people that ever went 5 miles or 10 miles from their own village is nil. And how come you had 50 million people every Sunday morning going to a church that was exactly the same, kneeling down, listening to the same mumbo-jumbo, believing in the same weird shit? There's some god who's an old, bad-tempered guy up there in the sky who's a megalomaniac asshole who's in his neighborhood, and he sent his only son down here to die on a cross for your sins. And what were your sins? Because Eve ate the apple of knowledge from the tree of house. And then Christ was born of a virgin, or something like that. It wasn't a virgin. It's called the Immaculate Conception, or the spermless fuck. And they had 100 million people believing this. And kneeling down in the same way, believing the Father. I mean, now that is a genius of mindfuck. We've got to understand. And of course, the way they did it is simple as, it's the same way they're doing it right now on television. You turn on your television set tonight, and you'll see that commercial. My favorite is "The Night Belongs to Michelob." They jam you with information, they jam you. It's all multimedia, with sound, with swirling stuff, and then they Michelob, kneecap, here's a big muscle thing like that, dancing, music, sound, sex, Michelob, and then the father said, "Thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory." The point is, we're now just learning how we learned in the 60s a little bit. If we only knew at Harvard in 1963 how to make a Michelob beer commercial, and we could have stopped the Vietnam War, and Nixon would be like Tommy Smothers. I mean, really. Now, we're having fun here, but of course I've started this rap by telling you that I've never been so spooked as the way the people that run the television shows, particularly the Republican Party and Lee Atwater and the Spin Masters, and you noticed George Bush on television today, when he's doing education. There was George in a ghetto school reading from a little book for the little kiddies. I mean, really? How are you going to vote against a guy like that? When's the last time you went to a ghetto school and checked out a kid? And of course, it was all laid out so clearly. The first time they started that massacre in the Persian Gulf, I think it was Dick Cheney, the head of defense, was he the one, and said, okay, the war's going to start today. One thing we're going to tell you, Turkey, is you're not going to see what goes on there. We're going to totally censor and control everything you see, okay? You know, 68% of the American people approved and didn't want to see what was going on over there. But why not? Because I want to tell you, the Michelob beer commercial is nothing. The commercial, the Persian Gulf War was like a $1 billion commercial for the military. I mean, the Scud missiles and the things going off and the bombs and something like that, and coming down like that. That was, my God, let's all join up. I mean, really. Of course, they're all just doing their job. You know, what job? Anyway. I'm circling around this point that there's a wonderful rhythm and a wonderful logic and a wonderful back and forth to evolution that in the 60s, one of the ways that we brought about that consciousness mind revolution was that there was a period there, and I watched it happen, even participated in it after a while, was we learned how to control the screen. And I personally learned it from John Lennon. How about a round of applause for John Lennon? They're tearing down statues of Vladimir Ilyich, and they're going to be putting up statues of John in Prague or in Leningrad, because I watched John Lennon, how he did that. And the first trip that the Beatles came over this country, I can remember very clearly watching it. And the press would come out, and they'd be very serious. You know how you're supposed to be serious when you're on television and all that. And they'd ask John a question, and John would look at the camera, and he'd just goof it off. He would just not play that game at all. And he would say, and I learned it so quickly. And after a while, George caught on, and then Ringo and even John caught on after a while. You know, he just don't play their game. So I learned very quickly from John, so I would get on television. Looking back at it now, I haven't thought of this in a long time, but it has a certain relevance what's going on now. And one thing they always tell you, if you do any television, is look at the interviewer. Don't look at the camera, right? Well, see, I learned from John Lennon, fuck that. So, I learned off from John. In the middle of me talking to people, he'd bring back down and said, I turn to the camera. This is back like late 60s. And say, look, what I have to say now is right to go into your living room. And the mother and father, you're not going to maybe like it. So why don't you just go to the refrigerator and get a beer, son? I don't want to talk to the kids in this country. And this kind of that. See, that's the ability to break through the lock. And, of course, the mind controllers, the people, you know, that run the thing, caught on very quickly, and they did an incredibly genius thing when they, no one will believe it, in 1980 when they nominated, you know, an absolute blathering, dithering, moronic person named Ronald Reagan.
Oh, God.
But see, that's perfect. What? Yeah, sure. I'm having a lot of fun with this notion about drugs these days because, you know, drugs. Geez, I don't like to talk about drugs. I take them anytime I fucking want. But, I have a terrible drug problem. I can't get marijuana. People asking about drugs, you know, well, you know, Even in Japan, what they say, lay off the drug thing, Timothy, you know. No problem about that. You know. There are basically two kinds of drugs. A lot of scientific studies done, and common sense, you all know. There are basically two psychopharmaceutical genres here. There are Republican drugs and Democrat drugs. What was that? Well, the Republican drugs, the drugs that nobody ever heard of until Reagan got into office, like I never heard of crack. I'm the guru, the head man of the world of drugs. I fucking grew a generation of drugs. I didn't know what crack was. Drugs, 3 bases of it, not to mention steroids, you know. So Republican drugs are drugs that have become popular during the Republican years of the last 11, 12 years. And they are cocaine and crack, and of course the great return of booze. There was a time in the late 60s or 70s when anyone was getting drunk or come around, you know, oh my God, what a strange way to get high. Because Republican drugs are drugs that make you feel, number one, you're macho, you're strong, you know, like that, self-confidence, all that. Whereas Democrat drugs, or not Democrat drugs, I'm not a Democrat, the liberal drugs are the wimp drugs. You know, they're drugs like psilocybin or mushrooms or peyote or LSD, or they make you feel calm and quiet. And they make you just, you love everybody, and you're kind of seeing, you get a little confused because you see too much and all that. And, you may forget your zip code, but after write it down on your wrist. And I said, I was on one interview with his well, kid, I was saying, look right in the audience and say, I want to say to the Republicans in this audience, stay away from marijuana. Stay away from psychedelic drugs because they'll make you into a wimp. And you wouldn't want that to happen. Terrible things happen to Republicans and chief executives and military people if they take Democratic drugs. And I said, well, can you give an example of a Republican or, taking Democratic drugs? And I said, yeah, well, we just found out from the Kitty Kelly biography that Ronnie Reagan was smoking marijuana when he was in Sacramento. That explains everything, doesn't it? The amnesia, short-term memory loss, the long naps after lunch, and the cheerfulness in spite of all reality. Savings and loan deficit, war, poverty, racism, and country going to hell, right? Hey, what? Not you, everything's fine, we're not going Anyway, how long have I been talking here? Too long, I think.
4 hours.
50 minutes.
I know Jean-Pierre told me not to leave the mic, but I'm going to take the mic. Anyone have any questions or comments, or like to, any,
What's the outlook for the 90s to you?
Right, oh, thank you. Boy, that's great. I left you in a very depressed mood here. I've never seen anything, I've never seen such skillful, well, of course, it's always been that way. If you look at human history, to keep a species like this going, you have to, you have to make it hard to change. You have to discourage innovation. There are certain times in the past when you simply couldn't have too much creativity, and you couldn't have individuals. The feudal age, the idea was that you were a servant of God, and your job was simply to do what you were told, and we get you to heaven. And there was the Pope and then God. The basic person in a feudal society, well, lays it right out. You're a domesticated animal. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He maketh me lie down, mechanical industrial age, out of which we're just evolving, the definition of a human being, a good human being, was you know, someone who's dependable, reliable, prompt, industrious, efficient, replaceable, you know, independent to a machine. And it was necessary to go through these. I see we have to go through these stages. And I was like, you're a child, you believe that in our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And then it is true, you have to learn certain skills. You have to learn how to run machinery and all that. So we have to go through these stages. The industrial age you had to go through it, but we're through it now. And now it's just becoming a polluting nightmare. We are going into the information age, the information based on Einstein, Planck, where singularity, individuality, it's all relativity, it's all, every situation is new, it's standard kind of new age bullshit written in the equations of quantum physics. But this is a very anguishing period, and the next 9 years until the year 2000 are going to be very spooky. Because these turkeys really know how to manipulate the media. I want to tell you, as well as anyone in the world, I am skeptical and cynical about television, and I want to admit, they had me hooked during that massacre over there. I mean, I was watching it like you were, those Spud rockets and all that. The sad thing is that obviously none of us can get a studio or a mass broadcasting. We can't have a channel and so forth. We can't. It's very hard to have the guerrilla type of television we had in the 60s. Abby Hoffman was so good at it, and Jerry Rubin and so forth. We can't do that anymore. Matter of fact, I was in Chicago with Mel, Robert and Wilson, a couple of days ago, and we were asked to go to Lincoln Park in Chicago. That's where all that stuff came down, you know, the Chicago riots and all that. And it was supposed to be a mass rally for the Illinois initiative to legalize marijuana. And I knew ahead of time it was a disaster. Because, well, marijuana people are never good at organizing things. They said it was at Lincoln Park, but they didn't say which end, and, you know, so we got there, and I was parked in the car watching it, and there was a field, about 200 pleasant-looking people kind of, you know, around, but they were definitely not take-charge people. They were definitely hippies, and they were, you know, it looked like a small Grateful Dead concert, which I think is wonderful, but doesn't look good on the 7 o'clock news, you know. If you want to try to persuade voters. And there was a there was a platform like this, and there was a guy giving a harangue. He was the presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party, a wonderful guy, but it was all so old-fashioned. And if you took pictures of that and did get it on the 7 o'clock news, it would be the worst possible thing that would, in the rough and tumble 90s, to try to win votes for such a, you know, a situation. The terrible thing we're facing now, the control of the mind, and the fear of being different. That's why I was so kind of interested in what Mel and I, he's a fucking professor in Penn State, and he was running around with a Guns and Riot t-shirt on an airplane. It's something you simply don't do these days. And I'm not urging that as a political device. What's going to happen is that we're going to get control of the screen. World War III has already happened. It's happening in your eyeballs. It's happening in the pupils of your eye. Our motto now is power to the pupils, meaning to the students, power to the pupils, but also power to the eyes. You've got to control your eyes, because your eyes are this incredible appendage of your brain. You've got to make sure that what comes on the screen and hits your eyes, that you have control over. The terrible thing about it is the human brain is so... I talk to my brain all the time. And she tells me, you know, what's going on. And she says, you know, she and all the other brains are just bored at the kind of stuff we're showing. I mean, English language, she wants movement, she wants access. My brain tells me she can handle what's called RPM, realities per minute. She can handle about 150 million signals a second, you know, so that the power of television, the power of MTV, and the power of multimedia graphics is that boy, your eyes respond to that. In every culture, in every climate, in every continent, people love to stick their eyeballs out there and be inundated by fast-moving electronics. These electrons are the food, water, and air of the brain. Until recently, the power to do this multimedia stuff. You know, back in the 60s and early 70s, I remember we developed at Harvard, and it was taken over by some of the rock groups, something that's called, we were trying to project the multimedia, fast-moving inundation overload of the human brain when it's turned on. And it was called psychedelic lighting. So you'd have jello and you'd move it around, we'd have slide projection and all that. The masters of this, who are still masters of this trade, are of course the Grateful Dead. How about a round of applause for the Grateful Dead? Still, there's no way that individuals or even groups of individuals can compete with Michelob and with the $100 billion budget of multimedia advertising of the military. But a wonderful thing has happened, and I have a real faith in the genetic, the genetic destiny that we were not put on this planet to evolve for 15 billion years to have a fat-ass bully named Schwarzkopf be our hero, see? I mean, it's more to evolution than that. I simply refuse to accept that. Where time is right, the solution happens. And the solution happened, I think, about 2 years ago when a device came on the market. It was called a CD attachment, a compact disc attachment to a video game player like Nintendo or Sega or even Macintosh and so forth. Because when you put a CD drive into a computer or even a Nintendo game player, you've taken that left brain, little alphanumeric thing that's, there's no way we're going to bring down the world with electronic bulletin boards and little words like that. We may be saying the cleverest thing, but who the fuck cares? But when you attach a compact disc, and they cost now about a couple $100 within a year or two, every kid that now has a Walkman in the city or is going to have a CD with a, suddenly it's like your right brain exploding. You can put colors, you can put, you've got MTV and your own television set. So next week I'm going to be talking more about telepresence and how you can take your eyeballs and your brains and project them around the globe. It's called telepresence. But that's my answer to your question. I thank you. It's also an announcement what I will be doing here next Tuesday night. I thank you very much. I've had a good time. I always do. And keep the faith. Good night.
Timothy Leary.
Well, every time I come here, I pay tribute to this turf and this territory, which has been my breeding, stamping grounds for the last 20 years. When I first came here, after I got out of prison in 1876 or whatever, I wrote several scientific essays with diagrams and charts and statistics proving that the evolution of intelligence and freedom had been migrating in an unbroken line from east to west, and it finally located here in the Sunset Strip, which was the last landing pad and the ultimate launching pad. It's I do a great deal of talking these days. It's just a habit that I can't kick. I do lecturing in Europe, and I've been paying many visits to Japan. And I have very good news to tell you about a new breed, a new spirit that is emerging among young people, young in age or young at heart, around the world. But when I come to this turf, I feel a special emotion and a special sense of belonging. And the more you plow through the outer space or inner space, the more you treasure and take bliss in the home base. And this is home base for me. And I want to thank Jean-Pierre, who has managed a wonderful atmosphere. How about a round of applause for our host, Jean-Pierre? I'm especially touched tonight because there are many dear and close friends of mine here. It's really a great honor and pleasure to tell you about one of them, a man that has been my teacher for more years than I'd like to admit in public. This is a man who first taught us about interspecies communication, everything that we know about ecology and the unity of the various forms of intelligence on this planet. We're pushed in this direction by the man I'm going to mention in a minute. In 1972, I believe it was, John, this man wrote what I think is the greatest essay that the human brain has ever manufactured. The title alone is the ultimate bumper sticker of the 21st century. It's something like programming and reprogramming of the human biocomputer. And for his, I consider this man to be, I call him the Christopher Columbus of our species. He has certainly charted the unknown realms of man of great intelligence and humor and courage. I ask you to join me in a round of applause for John Lilly. Chill in my spine when I sense that you share the love and deep admiration I have for John. And by the way, we're not alone. In every foreign country that I go to, people have heard about John, and that's he's not one that gets a lot of wild headlines. It's just almost a legendary, pervasive knowledge that the most intelligent of our species has about this pioneer. And of course, wherever John goes, he travels like our Finny friends with schools of wonderful, intelligent people. There's my friend Brumbear. Brumbear and I hung out together in Europe when I was in exile. Brumbear, stand up and wave. When I was in exile in Switzerland, I love Switzerland. It's a wonderful place. I used to say I knew every freak in Switzerland, all 39 of them. It's a wonderful place, but it gets a little boring after a while. And I don't know what I would have done in my exile of Switzerland if Brumbear hadn't come down from either Munich or Stuttgart or where he was. At that time, Brumbear edited a magazine called Germania, and it was the equivalent of the Rolling Stone or the Berkeley Barb. It was the ultimate counterculture magazine in Germany. And when I say counterculture in Germany, I'm not talking peanut butter, my friends. It's a great pleasure again to welcome Brumbear and Phil Bailey, who's just come back from Switzerland, and Michael Siegel. I could go on. Thank you all for being here. And again, without being too sentimental, I must pause and tell you that I had a human experience yesterday afternoon with my wife Barbara and my 17-year-old stepson Zach. We went out to Venice Beach and parked the car and walked through the elevated soles along the boardwalk. And, I was feeling home there. And out by the ocean, along this, go through this long, wonderful expanse of golden sand. There was a small afternoon party we were joining. It was about 20 people with a beautiful Indian blankets and saris and a picnic spread. And I said, where's the star? Where's the person we came to see? He said, oh, he's out there swimming in the ocean. I'm talking... How many of you know what the biosphere is? Biosphere too? Yeah. Well, this was a meeting, kind of a going away meeting of two members of the biosphere who on the 26th of September are going to close themselves into, eight people are going to close themselves into this totally self-sustaining, independent Terra 2, Biosphere 2. It's the first time that human beings have ever been able to live on an atmosphere. They get only information and some electric energy in this 2-year voyage. It was interesting, particularly meaningful for Barbara and me, because we had last weekend spent 3 days near Tucson, Arizona, where this incredible edifice, which has been building for I think 6 years now. I've seen it several times. You know, it's like 4.5 football fields. I could give you the statistics. There are 3,000 species inside of it. There are 7 bionomes, 5 of which are wilderness, like ocean and desert and savanna and marshland and oh God, you know, my memory's gone, but it's all right. And I've been around it for several years. I went there once with Gordon Liddy, who examined it both as a military possibility and as a target. The man I'm talking about, of course, was on the beach swimming, was Roy Walford, who's a professor of pathology at UCLA. He's probably the world's leading expert on life extension, rejuvenation. How many of you know the name Roy Walford? Yeah. He has 2 floors of animals in UCLA, and he's not using these animals for purposes of animal abuse or testing out any unpleasant stimuli that human beings should be protected from. He's keeping these rats alive, and he has hundreds of rats there that are living the equivalent of 200 human years. So there's an ultimate testimony to the ecological and humane, if I can use that horrible word, aspects of biological research. Roy Walford is the world's leading expert. And with him was Linda Lay, who is an ecologist, who's also going to be, for 2 years, in a position that, well, some of the Russian cosmonauts have been in the position maybe for close to 2 years, but never under an atmosphere or with the goals of this sort. And it was really spooky to be sitting on the sands of Santa Monica Beach and realizing, looking around, that, listen, there's a sense of claustrophobia there compared to the expanse and the vistas that you get when you go into the biosphere. And it was kind of touching to hear Linda saying that it's probably the last time she was going to be in direct contact with solar radiation for 2 years. Some of you may know that there have been some attacks on the biosphere, because here's a $150 million enterprise which has been building for well, really for about 20 years in the minds of the participants, but really hardware for about 8 years. And the amazing thing about it that makes many people furious is there's no government connection whatsoever, nor are there any investors or corporate sponsors. It's just human intelligence merging together to create this. I know the first reaction of many people, myself included, when you hear, well, gee, they're going to be in this bottle. Now, granted, it's a bottle as big as 4.5 football fields, but still, it's glass. I mean, the main question is, who's going to clean the windows? It's something like 4 square miles of windows, but we'll worry about that later. But just in the last year, they have been bringing in the species, and as I said, there are like 30 species of coral in the coral reefs. There's something like 3,000 microbiotic organisms. The numbers are baffling, and with my amnesia, I can't remember them all. But there have never been that many species brought together in that small an areas before. I think John Allen, one of the quarterbacks of this, said that there are more species in that small area than in the entire state of Arizona. Not to mention the fact that these species come from every corner of the globe. There are desert creatures from the Sahara from the mid-Asian deserts, selected, of course, on many grounds of compatibility and interpersonal charm. I don't know what the... and, of course, as I said, when you hear about it, you still have that sense of, God, you're going to be bottled up there. I want to tell you that when you're walking around there, there's a sense almost of it's too big, or you want to, I mean, for example, all the halls are twice as big as the halls in the richest business building in Beverly Hills or downtown L.A. The dining room is half as big as this room with small tables too. The computer room is because usually you see there are the constrictions of space. Space in Beverly Hills or space in Tokyo or space in downtown LA is so expensive, but here there's a sense of, and everywhere you look, you're looking out through deserts, or you're looking through rainforests. I can't tell you almost the jungle, ancient jungle fear that you get moving around in here. At one point, John Allen was taking Barbara and I through a jungle path through the rainforest, and it was kind of slippery, and that's just what it was, a jungle path. I learned from one of the biospherians something about rainforests, the reason that there have been so many wonderful symbioses between human species and plants and all those psychoactive, psychedelic, God knows what plants that Terence McKenna talks about. The reason why they come from the rainforest is that in the rainforest, the first thing you realize is you're being touched every second by several plants. I mean, it's just so, the foliage is so luxurious that as you move through, there's a continual caressing of the botanical species. It was goddamn dangerous. One time I'm sledding in the mud. I reached up to grab a branch and got a little thorn in my, there are cliffs, there's a little ocean there. But in a way, the spookiest thing about the biosphere is that on the ground floor, like in the basement, it'd be the equivalent of the basement of maybe 6 or 8 skyscraper buildings in New York City, you know? And there are just acres of the machinery and the air conditioning and the vaults and all that. I mean, to think that that 8 human beings are going to be, in a way, responsible for overseeing this. Of course, the wonderful thing about it is these 8 people are not going to be there alone because there's right outside, there's an incredible group of intelligent scientists and human beings with computers, and everything is being carefully monitored. I'm not going to apologize for digressing. They're going to close, or as we say, they're going to open the doors for the biospherians September 26th. So keep your ears and eyes open for the news, and with barring some unexpected misfortune, this great experiment of interspecies cooperation is going to start just in a couple of weeks. And one thing, you learn so much. I mean, just to be in this place, to realize that scientists have come from all around the world and donated their time. I talked to one scientist from, I think, Temple University, who comes there on his own money on his vacations, because it's a place, there's no place in the world where you can observe species this way. And in the eyes of these scientists, there's that glow, there's that enthusiasm that I remember we had back in the Harvard days, John, you know, when we felt we were on the verge of something very important. Now the question comes up, how come that, all the billions of dollars, the trillions of dollars that have been spent on research by the United States government during the Bush-Reagan administrations, how come there's never been kind of a big project like, well, it's not big, what's $150 million to the SNL fees of the Bush administration? It's just a drop in it's a golden parachute for a Bush Republican, but how come this is the first time that human beings came together to do this? Well, when you think about it, here's why. Because it's always easy and it's always trendy to get money for military research. As I cite you, the trillions of dollars of money that's gone into so-called defense budgetary during the Bush-Reagan years.
it's easy to get money for something that can make a profit. So for killing or for money, you can raise a lot of somebody else's funds. But this project is dedicated to life and to the harmony of life, and it's a great tribute to. And I can't go into details, but it's no accident that the people that are involved in this, engaged in this incredible harmonious adventure, are students of yoga. They have been with us in our spiritual adventures. The concepts of Gurdjieff and of work and of harmony and all that. And another thing about, I won't go on much longer about the biosphere, but John Allen, who is one of the directors of something or other there, and I share something that very few people know much about. Right after World War II, there was a tremendous boom in something new in psychology. It was called small group theory. Small group theory. And matter of fact, many of you probably heard this story, that my PhD thesis at Berkeley in 1948, 49, 50, was based upon something that was called group therapy. The idea was that we're going to take the power to diagnose the human mind and to control and change the human mind away from the medical profession and give it back to the people who are the owners and operators of these minds. So when I proposed to the director of the Palo Alto Veterans Administration Hospital, which later was exposed as a CIA LSD front. You know about that story. It's the same hospital where Allen Ginsberg and Ken Kesey all got their free LSD. They got paid to take LSD for the CIA. When I proposed to this doctor that I was going to do a thesis on group therapy, he looked at me as though I proposed to him a thesis on cannibalism or child molesting. He said, "Timothy, you cannot do therapy with psychiatric patients together in the same room, exposing their sick scars and psychic sores to each other. It will become contagious. You will cause an epidemic of psychosis and neurosis. The paranoid patients will listen to the obsessive compulsives. And the anal neurotics will get involved, and we go on and on and on." It was a shrink's nightmare. Timothy, you wouldn't give scalpels to surgical patients, would you? There's a little difference between carving up the body and trying to get people to develop self-confidence and insight, and the best way to do that, of course, is to get individual human beings together and talk over and share their problems. And one of you's got a harder case than mine, but you've worked out some solutions, and the sense of self-respect or mutual respect that comes out of all this has to do with the notion of group, of small groups. There's a man named Bion, B-I-O-N, who is not well known now, but after World War II, he wrote some interesting books about small groups. When you think about it, as a species, we are small group primates. We originally started in small groups, and small groups are wonderful. The great thing about a small group is that everybody else can treat everybody else as an individual. We all know each other, and we have to understand each other, and we have to be tolerant to each other. I mean, you're freaked up, and I'm freaked up this way, but we got to live together. There's a sense of a communality there that is totally lost in the larger social organizations like the feudal or the industrial. The power of people in a small group, of course, is wondrous. This was demonstrated by this man Bion in World War II because there are interesting puzzles. Turned out that World War II, with all this fucking heroism and so forth that we read about in the Bush propaganda machine, it turned out that about 50% of the soldiers in World War II in the front line did not fire their rifles. Now, you know why? Because firing your rifle out there in the trenches is a very dangerous thing to do. Because guess what? You got about 1,000 guys over there on the other side waiting for what? For the flash of your rifle. Now, they studied there were certain groups that actually did not only all fire the rifles together, but they actually performed brilliantly, and it turned out they had a higher survival rate. And when they found out why this happened, and I'm not, by the way, I'm not advocating new platoon tactics here, but it was where you get a small group of people that know each other and will cover for each other and will, take, that's so commonsensical, but of course will never occur a military officer that thinks run that way. Well, that's enough about the biosphere. I forget what the topic of the thing. Oh yeah, it was something about the Society of Brains. What I really want to talk about is the Society of Brains. Is I'm going to tell you. Yeah, I'm convinced, and I'm writing a book with some young Japanese scientists too, on the theory that we call it the new breed. There's a new breed of young people emerging on this planet, and it is a society of brains. It is a society of individuals as opposed to societies of national or religious or linguistic groups. I have been very touched, as I know you have been, by some of the events that we've seen in the last few months, having to do with the emergence on this species of this new breed of young people. Now, of course, I may be biased as an American, but I think that this new breed who brought down remember the Berlin Wall? Remember that in 1989? You know, all the politicians said, well, it was all because of Reagan outspent the Ruskies or this and that. You know, and I know, if you watch the television, that the Berlin Wall was the largest jailbreak in history. Think about it. I mean, you have to be an ex-con to have that point of view. Having spent almost 5 years in Nixon's prisons, that's the first time you look at a wall, and you hear thousands and thousands of people with a glint in their eye coming over that wall. And the interesting thing about this greatest prison break in history was that, these were very dangerous individuals, because every individual is dangerous to an authority. They were uncontrolled, dangerous individuals. And by the way, it was a maximum security prison in the Soviet Union. Think about it. And these were lifers. They had no hope of getting out with parole or get a lawyer. And when I watched those young people come over the wall, I had that sense of deja vu again. We've seen that before. We saw it just a couple of weeks ago in the pictures sent from Moscow or other parts of the Leningrad Soviet Union. It's that unmistakable gleam in the eyes of people who have been shackled and mind-controlled. Suddenly, they realize that they're fucking free. And it's a species thing. You can tell someone is feeling that way. You can tell by the way they walk, or the way they look, or by the gleam in their eye. And I was interested. I've been following the press. I happened to be I was in Tokyo when most of this coup stuff went down, and you realize when you're out of the United States, you realize how totally brainwashed we are here, how the narrowness, the absolute blandness, the myopia of the American press. In Tokyo, there are two English-speaking papers, the Tokyo Times and the Tokyo Post, who have international coverage. And then there's the wonderful paper, the International Herald Tribune. I think many of you probably know that. And I was getting pictures, and I had a lot of quotes that was going on. I'd like to... the point I'm trying to make here is that the events of the last month, which brought down a 40-year tyranny, or really a 1,000-year-old tradition of total totalitarian dictatorship in the Soviet Union and so forth, it was accomplished by the traditions and techniques of the American hippies of the 1960s. All right. I know I could be biased here. I know. I mean, I realized that I was a little amused, when my pal Gorby went around talking about glasnost and perestroika. Well, shit, man. I mean, did you hear of Mario Salvo, free speech at Berkeley? No, and did you ever hear of Abbie Hoffman? I mean, really, the notion of dealing with dictatorship and with tanks and guns, not with bombs or not with plots and plans and so forth, but with total open courage. one of the classic symptoms of this new breed species dealing with tyranny is the most obvious one. It was used again in Moscow just last week or 2 weeks ago, when the young people, and some women too, were throwing flowers at the tanks. I mean, you see, now they never taught me that at West Point. They told us we had to be aware of congressmen and women, and they had to be aware of the press, but gee, they never thought that we had to deal. I happen to know about the first time that tactic was really publicized in, it may have happened in the Greek Homeric Wars, but the first time it really hit the television and the wire services was in Berkeley, California, during the reign of terror of the governor at that time, one Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan should be given some credit here. I mean, most people think he's a brain-damaged, amnesic nut, but no. I give Ronald Reagan a real credit for having demonstrated how the hardliners should deal with student revolts. Ronald Reagan said, I think it was 1968, it was during the People's Park situation, Ronald Reagan, who was elected, by the way, on a hang the students or kick the students' ass ticket. He went in a wave of hatred of young people. When the students were protesting about People's Park, I think it was, Reagan said from Sacramento, said, all right, if we have to crush this rebellion with blood, let's bite the bullet and do it. But he sent the troops into Berkeley. And it was the first time that this principle kind of operated of dealing with flowers. Is a man that I came to know very well later. Brumberg, do you ever meet Super Joel? Yeah, Joel Tornabene. Anyway, he was a big hippie, and well, I won't say how he got arrested several times, but he was doing something with vegetables. But Joel is a very intelligent guy, and he was on the barricades, and there they had the National Guard. Now, what Reagan forgot was that when you draft the National Guard, you're drafting kids. Kids dressed up in uniforms with guns, and you're like their fellow college mates there, looking at them like, what the fuck are you doing, man? You know. And there was a famous picture when Joel Tornabene put the flower in the gun barrel, and I'm sure he had his own photographer there. And anyway, because it doesn't do any good unless you record it. I mean, if you're going to play the game of information politics and information communication, you got to have it. You got to have your hard copy there. You got to be able to send it over the wires. The same thing is true of another. I get a chill whenever I think of this young man. His name was Wim Wyland. He's a 19-year-old young man who in Tiananmen Square faced 18 tanks, and he stood there, and they rumbled up to him, and he was about 5 foot tall, and he didn't move. And in his right hand he had his school books, and in his left hand he had his lunch pail. I mean, that was great. The reason they didn't crush him, and the protection you have, is of course electronic communication. If they hadn't been the press of the world there because of Gorbachev's visit, you better believe Wim Wyland would be hamburger today. But because the press was there, that's that wonderful, wonderful figure of this tiny, small student. Of course, the hardliners in China took over. And I must say, the Chinese dictators, I must say they were pretty fair about giving credit. That guy Deng is his name, the 97-year-old senile guy that did it. So, well, I don't understand what America's complaining about shooting down the students. We learned that from Ronald Reagan in Berkeley and from Kent State. And I looked up Kent State, and the first time that students were shot down that way in protest was, once again, America was first on that one. I'd like to, you've seen some of these headlines, some of these quotes, but in tribute to our brothers and sisters in the Soviet Union, I'd like to read some of them. Headline in the Tokyo Post: Youth stands up and fights and grasps the Soviet future. Young new force emerges on the Moscow barricades. As armed tanks and personnel carriers closed in on the Russian parliament, 16-year-old Misha Podnikov was among thousands of young people standing arm in arm, ready to sacrifice their lives to resist dictatorship. Los Angeles Times, August 25th. Assuming they stay politically engaged, these young people could give a powerful new thrust to the movement. And ultimately, young new faces may appear in Russian or Soviet leadership lineups that had been for more than 7 decades dominated by, guess who? Old, or at best, middle-aged men. Yeltsin, choking back emotion, said he was especially grateful to the youth, who were the first to stand up for the defense of freedom. Oh, here's a good one. The vast majority, I think this was from the Tokyo Times, or maybe it was the International Tribune. The vast majority of the people who built massive barricades out of the concrete blocks, bricks, scrap metal, and anything else available were in their teens or 20s. And these same volunteers, young men dressed in mismatched military fatigues, quote, Soviet hippies with long hair and worn-out jeans, and young women in miniskirts and stiletto heels. Also man the human barricades. How about a round of applause for it? New libertarian chic is miniskirt. Anyway. Another good one here. Oh, here's another quote which we're collecting here for the getting quotes about young people. This is another amazing, interesting little news story that was kind of covered up in a way. It has to do with the cruise liner Oceanos. Remember that? This cruise liner had some sort of a mishap, and the Greek captain, Yannis Avranis, abandoned the bridge, leaving passengers, including women and children, to their fate in a rough sea. Now, that's exactly how I see Nancy and Ronnie Reagan, if I tell you the truth, you know. Quote, we had to take over the ship, says Terry Lester, 26, who worked as a comedian on the cruise liner. If it hadn't been for the entertainers, a lot of people would have drowned. I know Michael Segal will agree with me, and when I'm being interviewed and people say, well, where do you find the new breeder? You know, throughout human history, it's always been the classic case that the resistance to authority and the libertarian spirit has always been passed down, not necessarily by professors in famous universities, but by, well, you know, the usual suspects, and I see a lot of you in the room right here. The artists and the poets and the comedians and the painters and the, you know, the junglers and the, you know, the stand-up philosophers, if you know, yeah. Well, here's a good one. This is from the CBS Evening News, September 3rd, 1991. It's a junior high school kid saying, I don't believe in communism. I only believe in myself and my mind. Now, where the fuck do you think he got that note? Well, I think we got to give a lot. Of course, these movements. The nice thing about these movements, these evolutionary movements, these spontaneous uprisings of the human spirit of freedom, there are never any leaders. There are cheerleaders. There are people that, you know, we could give Bob Dylan. Certainly gets credit enough for all of history. I quote Dylan a lot. When Dylan said, "I ain't gonna work on Maggie's farm no more," you know, I ain't gonna work for Maggie's father no more. You know, the National Guard hangs around his door and all that. That's a great line, because I've quoted that in English in Japan. I say, "Hey, these Japanese youth are not gonna work on Sony's farm no more." Said young Chinese, you're not going to work on Mao's farm no more. Oh, you're absolutely right. Oh, here's a good one. This is from Valery V. Popov, a member of the Leningrad City Council. He said, youth who were just children when perestroika started really held the front lines of the people's defense. We had bikers and punks and anarchists all there together. there is another. One of the people that particularly touched me was a man named Ilya Khrushchevsky. How many of you know about his story? It's interesting. It says here, that's the LA Times. It says, there were 3 victims who were shot down by the Soviet military in Moscow. One was a hippie and a poet. Another had fought in the Afghanistan, and a third one had deserted from the KGB. And it says, Ilya Khrushchevsky, a hippie, who saw the world through his poetry, was one of the 3 victims of the renegade junta who were buried as national heroes. It said, his friend Sergei said, Ilya had the kind of character that wouldn't let him pass something without doing something about it. He was against the regime all his life, and when he saw the tanks here, he just couldn't stand the thought of the reforms of the last several years went up in smoke. A fan of heavy metal rock, who read and reread Alexander Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago, Khrushchevsky lived and died, his father said, by the ideals he illustrated in his poems. His mother said, he was a kind of hippie. His nature was very poetic, which I guess is not a very good characteristic for everyday life. How many of your mothers and fathers said that to you? He really thought he could stop the tanks. Well, he fucking did stop the tanks. And it's an interesting thing about Ilya. He was Jewish, which has got so many glorious and tragic paradoxical aspects to it that I can't even, it boggles my mind. So while we're celebrating and honoring this youth movement, which I do believe started in this country and moved slowly around the world, we have to face the tough, hard facts that the hardliners have taken over in China and they've taken over in America. I'm sure you're as shocked as I am when you look back and you see what's happened to America just in the last 4 years. I mean, Reagan was bad, but the Bush administration has learned how to control and wash and manage and manipulate minds. You know what methods they're using? There's a method that we stumbled on in our research at Harvard University back in the early 1960s. They're using multimedia overload and stimulation. Now, we're just learning something about the human brain. I wish we'd known this back at Harvard because it would have saved me 5 years in prison, I think. You know, it's so obvious when you think about it that the eyes are the windows of the brain. And of course, the brain is everything. The brain, we have 100 billion neurons, and you probably heard me say it before, but you can't say it often enough. The human brain, with its 100 billion neurons, linked up in parallel processing layers and clouds of intelligence and multimedia communication, it's simply impossible for us to even dimly understand the potential of this. And the tragic thing about it is that every human being born is equipped with this brain. When you see those pictures of the starving kids in Africa, you know, those haunting eyes and the big bellies, those kids are carrying a brain equal to Einstein's, except for the imprinting, or as John Lilly would say, the programming of the human body computer. We also realize, we're told that our forefathers and mothers, back in the cave days, the Paleolithic and earlier, they had the same brain. You know, the big brain started, 25,000 years ago, and you can now redefine, as I do, the evolution of human culture in terms of our understanding of the brain and our understanding of the methods by which brains are programmed and reprogrammed and can be controlled or liberated. And I must say that my work in using personal computers in the last 10 years has given me understandings about how you can reprogram brains, and if you get trapped in a word processing situation where you're just going around on the same old loop, how to hit the exit key or hit Control Q or some fucking key to get yourself out. hit LSD or, you know, there are certain buttons you can press to escape from the repetitious loops. But the most exciting thing to me, I just learned about it from a student of Marshall McLuhan's, who's now running the McLuhan Institute in Toronto. He's a Belgian. By the way, the Belgians are coming, they're kicking ass these days. I met about 4 Belgians, you know. The old Belgians, remember what's going on over there? The old Belgians are kind of the plump, fat, prosperous, you know, people. These new Belgians, what I'm meeting, are just out there roaring and tearing up. One of the Bosturians is a Belgian, for that matter. Well, what this Derek de Hoover said in his book published by the McLuhan Institute, that the human eye is actually made up of brain cells. And that, you know, you think about the pupil of your eye, it's just like, they used to think, well, the brain is a big telephone center like New York City. It's got all these wires coming in, all these connections, all these wires coming out. No shit. I mean, that's pretty good, man. My brain is as big as Ma Bell. That's pretty good. Too bad I don't know how to dial my own numbers. But, and they used to tell us that the eye is like a camera, you know, the focus. Well, that's all bullshit. The pupil of the eye is made up of layers and layers, the equivalent of almost miles of layers of rods and cones. And light hitting, and all the light that comes through it's going through, talk about it, an Amazon jungle and a rainforest, coming through these rods and cones. And I've got a new motto, because we're trying to take these personal computers with help of Brumberg and Novak and some of our friends. We're trying to take computers away from the business people, not away, but, and we're trying to get inexpensive multimedia computing facilities into the hands of young people. But the one thing that we're learning is that we have this new motto. It's called, we used to say power to the people. Now we say power to the pupil. And we're not just talking about the students. We're talking about the eyeballs. Or power to the dilated pupils. Yeah, you think I'm just making jokes, but that's really quite the thing is this, that I had a big debate with a man named Marvin Minsky. Do you know who he is? I mean, he's the father of artificial intelligence. He's the big hero of MIT. He's got millions of dollars in research grants from the Defense Department and the Media Lab. He's absolutely worshipped. I bathed him for 3 days in a beautiful place in Japan. It was like a Leary debate. Minsky is an absolute monster engineer who believes that the human being is an absolute mess. I mean, I heard him say in Linz, I don't know who was here, in Linz, Austria, I was debating, and he said to the Austrians, he said, what's all this stuff about human intelligence? I mean, artificial intelligence will be much better. And what's all this romance about human beings? Once you've seen one human being, you've seen them all. That's, now, yeah, of course, that's a very shrewd, intelligent, funny guy saying that. But he believes it. I mean, really. And we were. I forget what I was talking about. You know, I'm very amnesic, and I was talking about power to the pupil, and power to the dilated pupil. Yeah, and this guy debating Minsky. I've got a tape. Over in Japan. With all this translation going on, it was interesting. Minsky and I were saying to each other things we'd never say in America. We were insulting each other, and in a sense of like Lydia and I do it. At one point, Minsky said, the most stupefying thing that ruins human intelligence, that a machine will never be guilty of, is human beings like music. Now, come on, music, it's just repetitious. You hear the same thing over and over again. I mean, what could be more of a stimulus for repetitious, stupid thinking? And, of course, half the Japanese there, I don't know how they were translating it, think of him as he's the Nobel Prize winner and their kind of art, but the other half were really, it was very interesting. They were catching on to what was going on. And they announced that evening, we were going to crack a keg of sake open, and then we were all going to go out, and they had a big stand there, and they were going to have native musicians from the province come in with flutes and drums and all that, and we were all welcome. So by this time, I'd really say I was grabbing that microphone anytime I wanted to, and I said I want to speak for all the foreign members of this delegation here. We want to thank the hosts and the people of the hotel for providing us with a wonderful native thing and the sake and so forth, and the music. There's only one announcement. Professor Marvin Minsky is not allowed to come because we all know he doesn't want to damage his intelligence with music. Okay, let me see what... Oh, yeah. I had an interesting experience down in the biosphere. I was talking... One of the things of the biosphere, in addition to the 3,000 species of plants and animals and so forth, are the human beings that come here, because of the 8 biospherians, 4 are women and 4 are men. I think 5 of them are non-Americans. And I was sitting talking to, not a biospherian, but a visitor, this tall German woman who came from, maybe you'd know what this is, remember the Frisian Islands up in the North Sea? And they say they're part of Germany, but they're really Vikings and Nordics, and they all are 7 foot tall, and they're pretty smart. And she went to Oxford, Cambridge, and other places, and she was a really incredibly interesting, intelligent woman. And she never really so much sounded American. And I go, what do you think of this country? She says, well, I'm astonished as a visitor to the country by the religious fanaticism. She says, it's like being in Tehran, that religion. And I said, yeah, I mean, isn't it terrible? I mean, I have taken in my recent attempts to loosen up, derail, and disrupt the Bush mob rule of this country through television to insulting religion, and it's kind of fun to do it. Famous last words by Salman Rushdie, right? Hey, Ayatollah, listen to this one. Here's a good one for you. I just make fun of, suppose you say, get down on your knees. 50 million Americans who are allegedly sane get down on their knees and say, our Father who art in heaven, thy kingdom come. Thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory. The Lord is my shepherd. He maketh me lie down in green pastures. I mean, what the fuck is that all about? I mean, if the Lord is your shepherd, who does that make you? But this is... I've talked to intelligent people who have lived in Iran. There are really, a lot of incredibly intelligent, well-educated, liberal, progressive Iranians, and not just the ones that are buying up Beverly Hills. You talk to them, and they've said, that it's when you get in a culture that's so fanaticized and where mob rule, you don't dare say anything. And I think that, in a funny way, we're all a little censored in this country by the... for example, there's a whole thing about this Judge Thomas now, that there's a whole big... It's all a clever ploy. Judge Thomas is George Bush's Willie Horton for the next election. You understand that. But the great thing is that Judge Thomas has announced that there's a natural law that is more powerful than the Constitution. Well, no shit, Sherlock. What's this? Get radio a little late at night, you know what he'd do. See, the thing about this is that if one person comes out with a kind of a wild megalomaniac, paranoid delusion of grandeur or of divinity, one person is, nobody, it's all right, it's just an individual. Like if some young woman announces that she's pregnant, and she said, well, I'm a virgin. I just had a vision one night, and the Holy Ghost came and knocked me up. In this country right now, there are about, I don't know how many million Catholics who really believe, and Christians, Protestants too. By the way, one of the ominous things, one of those ominous things that's happening in America is the Catholics are joining up with the Protestants. And they're all becoming right-wing Republicans. They're all joining the police force. I mean, really. because we could always count on these differences, but it's really spooky because what these Protestants and Catholics believe is that this mafio, bad-tempered, megalomaniac, paranoid up there God sent his only son down here. Why? To suffer and die for your sins, and your sins, and your sins. And the sin, of course, the original sin was of Eve, who took the apple from the tree of knowledge and was the first human being to think for herself. I'm not sure that Adam ever caught on. But the way this thing goes, if you get 50 million people all saying the same thing, it becomes you don't dare, say, suppose you were to say to some Catholic, well, explain to me about the Immaculate Conception. I mean, we call it, otherwise known as the spermless fuck. Huh? I mean, were there any sperm involved, or where'd they come from, or just start applying common sense questions, and you may be suffering the fate of Salman Rushdie. I have been watching American politics for 60 years, and I want to tell you that I have never been more spooked as I am today at the level of blandness and of acceptance. There's a total, but I understand. I understand how they did it, and goddamn, I got to give them credit. They used psychedelic techniques that we wrote about in the psychedelic prayers and psychedelic books 20 years ago. They learned how to program brains. Of course, the way you do it, remember the eyes, remember the dilated pupils. So you got to get, if you can control the eyeballs, Lyndon Johnson said, get them by the balls and their hearts and minds will follow. So forget the testicles. If you get them by the eyeballs, you got them. Because sometimes, late at night, I'm watching MTV with my son, and I see, particularly I'm interested in there's this talk about psychedelic multimedia sensory overload. Did you ever see the one about the night belongs to Michelob? Yeah. I mean, that's good acid. I mean, really. Oh, music and flashing lights and strobes, and then there's a little tit and a little mescaline muscle and this and that, and whirl, and then boom, boom, the beer's poured like that. And sign me up. Give me I'm on my knees for Michelob, If we'd only known about that back in the 60s when we were at Harvard, we were trying to get some way. So what we're talking about here is the left brain. We can communicate what our left brain comes up with, all the linear alphanumerics and all that. But there's the right brain. It's been hard to express it. Well, the great painters have done it. Bromberg's done it on computers. Hieronymus Bosch. But basically, we're right brain mutes. We can't express what we can experience at these moments of right brain illumination. By the way, talking about power to the pupil, or talking about the brain, the eyeball, it's so obvious. Every mystic, every Ganges sage, every Buddhist philosopher, all the great teachers throughout history have all used the same eyeball terms. They talk about illumination. They talk about revelation. They talk about insight. The Tibetans have the whole thing about the white light of the void, on and on. It's all visual. It's all optical. It's all eyeball stuff. And I want to give credit. I mean, I used to think until about 6 months ago that Jerry Garcia and the Grateful Dead had the best light show mindfuck thing going with the sound and the Grateful Dead. But I got to give it to George Bush and the people. And I particularly want to give credit to the people that put on the greatest television commercial in history. We've heard about Coca-Cola commercials that would spend like $10, $15 million. This is a commercial that I think cost about, $100 billion. I'm talking about the commercials for the military, which is known dominated our screen during that so-called Persian Gulf War. Now, I want to admit, I must confess, we're all friends here. I consider myself a totally skeptical, cynical person when it comes to anything that's on the boob tube. But I was sitting in front of the tube like everybody else, watching the Spud missiles and watching the boom like that. Look at that. I mean, it's $100 million commercial for the Army. I mean, and it worked. So I must, in this business of intelligence, if someone's smarter than you are, you can't complain and bitch about it. You simply got to smarten up. And like when there was one statistic that, when at the beginning of that ground war, Cheney, the defense guy, came in front of the cameras and he says, "Okay, Mr. and Mrs. America, we're not going to tell you or show you what's going on over there. You're going to see in your screens exactly what we want you to see. Otherwise, we'd be threatening the lives of our troops." And you don't want to do that, do you? You know that 70% of the American people didn't want to have they didn't want to see the bodies. They didn't want to. No, they were very happy with happy news. Well, that's the downside. I consider of course, it's been Newton's 3 laws of politics and force and power. The first one is, if you want to get political power, you have to play for the lowest common denominator in your people, the LCD, the famous lowest common denominator. Well, you know what that is: fear and rage and paranoia and survival, and get them feeling that they're surrounded by a devil or a demon, and like that. Well, the lowest common denominator will get your military appropriations and keep you in power. The second law of Newton's law of politics is that operating on the principle of the lowest common denominator in politics, the scum rises to the top. And I think that I rest my case on that one. There is, you see, it's a mob rule. I've debated G. Gordon Liddy about the Gulf War, and people of Liddy's ilk, and there are millions out there, seriously do believe that Norman Schwarzkopf is the greatest general since Hannibal. Or possibly Schwarzenegger. Anyway, so that's the downside. The upside is that human intelligence and the illumination of freedom and our knowledge of eyeballing certainly can assist us in avoiding the mob rule of the Bush administration. There are a couple of things we have on our side. See, it's one thing, if you study Hooper ratings, you see that the attention span of the American people is pretty short. That's why that war was over, what, 100 days? Yeah. I mean, there was no question that they'd studied their Hooper ratings, and they knew that, all of the family lasted maybe 3 seasons, but listen, we got to get this one over fast. But then it's all over, and yes, it was the greatest victory since Thermopylae or whatever Hannibal did. But what did we do with him? The guy is still in power. He's stronger than ever. We're broke. There's more killing going on. The corruption in this country. We're going to have a presence there, and talk about no more Vietnam is worse. It's going to be a permanent. There's a man named Robert Anton Wilson. How many of you know Robert Anton Wilson? I had the fun of being with Robert in Chicago 2 weekends ago. Boy, I tell you, Chicago was bouncing because in one weekend there was a national convention of the Libertarian Party, of which I'm a member. And there was the science fiction convention of 6,000. If you think we're weird, woo! 6,000 of them. And then there was a big national meeting of the legalized marijuana and make hemp our #1 vegetable people. That was a pretty wild weekend with Robert Anton Wilson. And Wilson is wonderful to talk to. He was making the point, I didn't know this, but that George Bush's brother, or maybe his oldest son, I forget the details, who cares, one of the close family members of the president is the leading investor in the oil wells of, not Kuwait, but Bahrain, is it? Yeah, you got to get the pictures. So, yeah, whatever. So that the whole thing about the war for oil is, anyway, these are part of the things that American people don't want to hear about now. But I'm quite convinced that, see, it's going to be very hard to have we've got Terminator 2, and we've got Fatal, this and that 2. It's going to be hard to have a Persian Gulf 2. It just is not going to fly. That's one good thing on our side. Of course,